Hi everyone, Christina here. Welcome to another card video at my YouTube channel and blog. Today I'm going to be creating a card using a Build-A-Flower stamp set from Altenew. They have quite a few of these. In today's video I'm going to be using the Anemone set, but you also saw on screen the Gardenia and Ranunculus set. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm stamping the outline image of this flower in some VersaFine Onyx Black ink, which is waterproof. I'm going to be doing some watercoloring on these flowers, so I needed to use a waterproof ink. And I'm also stamping them on a specific type of paper. I'm using some Strathmore Bristol paper today because I'm going to be using some watercolor markers and also distress inks, but stamped distress ink, and I think it just picks up a little bit better when it's on Bristol paper. So I wanted to show the back of that packaging there because it shows the different ways that you can build up this flower image. And I'm starting out with not the solid flower, but the next step up that has a little more details on it. And my first idea was that I would use these Arteza watercolor markers and I would brush the color onto the flower shape and then stamp it down and then add some water and spread the color around. It was a good idea, but it didn't quite work as well as I had hoped because that ink really beads up on the surface of that stamp. And so it doesn't really allow for nice, even coverage of the ink. And so therefore, when you go to spread it around, it's really diluted and there's not much color there and it looks kind of splotchy. But I did want to show you that my initial idea was that. And I'm going to show you just this blue flower that I create because this is the one I end up using on my card today. I took some chipped sapphire distress ink and I inked up the even more detailed step of this particular Build-A-Flower. And then I stamped that down right over the top of what I'd already done. This is going to add some detail, but then also when I go to watercolor and kind of pull out that color, some of that detail will stay behind, which I think is kind of a fun idea because it looks like a watercolor image, but you're still getting that kind of detail that helps with the shading of the flower. So I'm just using a water brush today for this. This is one from Pentel. It's their Aquash brush. And I'm not squeezing the barrel of the brush at all. I'm just letting the water flow out naturally. And it's just enough water to get the distress ink kind of blooming away from the original stamped lines. And that's exactly what I want. And to make it more interesting, I'm now going to bring in a watercolor marker. This is kind of like a orchid color, a little pinkish violet color, and I'm just going to add that to each petal in some different spots just so I have kind of like a little burst of color on each one of these petals. It just gives it a little bit more interest and it also makes it kind of feel like it's glowing to me. That brightness from the watercolor marker really lends itself to that idea. And you can see those other two examples that I did color completely, but I did not use them on my card today, so I decided to not show all of that on camera. Then took some mustard seed distress ink and I stamped both the outer shape of the center of the flower and then also the very middle of the flower. And that's just going to finish off the center. I did take a little bit of that chipped sapphire ink and I pressed it onto an acrylic block and picked it up with a water brush so that I could paint in the shaded areas in between the center and the ends of those stamen. So that finishes the flower, and I thought I would go ahead and die cut it while I've got this out. I've got the coordinating or matching dies for the stamp set, so I'll just run that through my Big Shot machine. And it cuts it out beautifully, gives it a nice edge around all the flowers. And at this point, I decided I'm going to need some leaves, so I decided to do the same thing, and I stamped the outline image of the leaf, and then I used some distress ink for the darkest shading. This color I'm using is Forest Moss. It's kind of more of a muted green. I thought it would go well with the flower and really let the brightness of that flower shine. So I'm going to add some watercolor marker to bring in a little bit more brightness like I did with the petals on the flower. So I'm bringing in kind of like this, more of like a lemon yellow shade, and I'll just spread that around. And I colored all the leaves in the same fashion and then die cut them using the matching dies. So on the back of the packaging on the stamp set, not only does it show you how to build the flower, but it also has a great example of how you can use the leaves with the flower image. So I'm going to use that as a guide to build this flower cluster of leaves and the flower itself. Putting some foam adhesive or some foam squares that I've cut down just at the very bottom of each leaf. That allows me to stick it to the back of the flower shape, and it's going to give some dimension on my final card. I put foam adhesive on each one of these leaves and just pressed it down onto the flower. And I love that there's an example of this flower and leaf kind of grouping on the packaging, because it makes it a whole lot easier when you come up with an arrangement. You could, of course, make up your own arrangement, but I thought, I've got the packaging, I might as well. So in order to fully prep this for my card, I'm going to go ahead and put a foam adhesive on the back of this cluster, and I'm going to put 2 layers of foam adhesive on that center area of the flower. And then I'm going to put small pieces of adhesive behind each one of the leaves. This is going to make that whole area really stand up away from the card. And I really like this foam tape because it's not too thick. It's not going to add too much bulk to my card, even though I will essentially have 2 layers of foam on the front of my card. So now I'm going to take some black cardstock from Gina K. This is some black onyx cardstock, and I'm prepping that with an anti-static powder tool so that I can do some heat embossing. I'm stamping a greeting from the same stamp set in Versamark ink, and I'll just go ahead and press that down onto the very bottom of this cardstock. And then sprinkled on some white embossing powder from Brutus Monroe. This is the color Alabaster. And then I used my heat tool to heat up that embossing powder until it was smooth and melted. I'm going to cut this to a little skinny strip of cardstock, and then I'm going to set that aside for a minute while I work on the actual card base. I've created a card base that's 5 by 7, so I just scored that at 5 inches and then folded it down. And I'm actually going to create another piece of cardstock that will go on the basically the inside of the front. I'm using this quilted embossing folder from We Are Memory Keepers, and it's actually a set of 2 different embossing folders. I'm just using one of them today, and I'll run that through my Big Shot machine. And that cardstock that I cut, I actually had it as 4 by 6, but as you can see, the edges of the cardstock on either side really didn't get that embossing, so I'm actually going to trim it down a little bit more. The finished size of this embossed piece is 5 3/4 by 3 3/4. I then put some adhesive on the back using some Tombow Extreme adhesive, and I will adhere that to the center of the front of my card. This is going to add some really nice texture, but it's still the same color as the card base, so it has a very elegant look to it. I'll now take that flower shape and I'm going to adhere it to the bottom left corner of my card. This is going to allow me enough space to the right of the flower to adhere my greeting. So I'm going to take a strip of foam tape that I've cut down so it's nice and narrow and fits on the back of that strip, and I'll just place that on the back of it. I'm also going to take a little bit of regular adhesive. Again, I'm using the Tombow Extreme adhesive, and I'll put that adhesive just on that one end, because this is the part of the greeting that's actually going to sit on top of the leaves that are 1 layer of foam tape up from the card base. I'll use my scissors just to give this end a little trim so it's not too long, and then I'll press that down. Now, if you wanted to, you could leave the card exactly like this, but I really wanted to add some special details. So I'm going to take some Nuvo Crystal Drops. This is in the color Simply White, and this is some of their gloss drops. And I'm going to do little drops of this at the intersecting points in the embossed pattern. So it's going to look like little pearls, kind of like embroidery pearls on like a textile of some sort. And I really love this look. I've seen it on a few cards. I can't remember exactly where, so I can't credit the idea to anyone in particular, but I really loved the idea of adding these special details. I then took a Nuvo, I think they call it an Aqua Shimmer pen. And this is in the color Clear Gloss or Clear Shimmer. I can't remember exactly the name, but I'll have it linked down below in the supply section. And I just coated the colorful petals on that flower. And that finishes up the card for today. I wanted to let you guys know that this video and blog post is actually part of a blog hop for Altenew. They're celebrating their Build a Flower line. So if you would like to see even more inspiration with this particular type of stamp set, go ahead and head to my blog and hop along to all the different stops on the hop. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I'll be back very soon with another card video. Thanks for watching.